Some people lose their money, some lose their homes, but the most terrifying thing you can ever lose is your mind. Tonight we're diving into 3 real cult stories that didn't just steal lives, they rewrote reality itself. Ordinary people, parents, students, neighbors, slowly stripped of their identity, their freedom, and even the ability to think their own thoughts. These aren't horror movies. These are real cases of human manipulation, so extreme, so calculated, that once you're inside, you don't even realize you're trapped. So get ready, because after hearing these stories, you'll question every leader, every belief system, and maybe even your own reality.
I've studied dozens of cults over the years, but few haunt me the way this one does. Because unlike many fringe sects hidden in the wilderness or buried in conspiracy, this one began with a promise so warm, so inviting, that thousands walked directly into it without realizing they were stepping off a cliff. Our first stop takes us back to the 1970s and 80s, a time of spiritual searching, a time when America's youth felt unmoored, adrift from conventional religion, hungry for meaning, desperate for belonging. And that's exactly when the children of God emerged. The promise of paradise. They advertised themselves as a new kind of Christian movement, a community founded on love, unity, and spiritual awakening. Young travelers, runaways, and idealists were drawn to them like moths. The cult's founder, who called himself a prophet, told them they were chosen, part of a divine army meant to transform the world. And at first glance, their communes really did look like paradise. Smiling faces, shared meals, music drifting through communal houses, people hugging like long-lost family. Members preached that they had broken free from the corruption of modern society, that they had discovered a pure form of Christianity. But beneath that warm glow, shadows were already spreading. Because in the children of God, love didn't mean what it should have meant. And the prophet's teachings were becoming twisted. In the late 1970s, the leader introduced what he called revolutionary love, a series of secret doctrines he claimed were divinely inspired. He wrote thousands of pages of revelations, but these weren't sermons. They were instructions, rules, methods, and they crossed lines no spiritual movement should ever touch. Members were told that their bodies were tools of God, that boundaries were barriers to salvation, that intimacy wasn't private, it was ministry. This doctrine would birth the practice that became the cult's darkest stain, flirty fishing. On paper, flirty fishing sounded like harmless evangelism, using affection to bring outsiders to the faith, but the truth was far darker. Women were ordered to go out at night, dressed in revealing clothing, and share God's love with lonely men, wealthy men, travelers, anyone the group hoped to convert or exploit. The prophet wrote that this was God's bait and that the women were fishers of men. But these women weren't missionaries, they were tools. Their identity, their autonomy, their safety, all sacrificed to the cult's expansion. Some were sent to bars and clubs, others to high-end hotels. Many didn't return until morning, shaken, silent, their love offering recorded as spiritual service. Inside the movement, it was glorified. Outside the movement, it left scars that would last lifetimes. And the worst part? Children were watching. By the early 80s, the children of God had communities around the world, sealed compounds filled with adults, teenagers, and hundreds of children born into the system. These kids didn't know the outside world. Their entire universe was the cult. They were raised on the prophet's writings like scripture. They were told outsiders were evil, dangerous, agents of Satan. They were told loyalty to the group came before loyalty to themselves. Isolation wasn't an accident, it was the foundation. Cut off from the world, these children had no freedom to leave, even if they somehow realized they needed to. Everything was monitored: reading material, letters, friendships, even thoughts. Questioning was punished, obedience was holy. And in some communes, the spiritual abuse escalated into something even worse. Forms of discipline and control so extreme that survivors struggle to speak of it even today. Some were forced into manual labor for hours. Some were shamed for the smallest mistake. Some endured punishments dressed up as corrections of the spirit. They grew up believing pain was normal, that suffering proved their devotion. Imagine being 5 years old and thinking love means fear. Imagine being 12 and believing the world outside your walls is a nightmare. Imagine waking up every day with no concept of safety, no concept of privacy, no concept of choice. For many of them, that was reality. By the late 1980s, the outside world began to take notice. Former members escaped and started speaking out. Journalists documented the group's bizarre behavior, its exploitation, its evangelism. Governments began investigations. The prophet, now aging and paranoid, retreated into hiding. But even as authorities closed in, the group attempted to rebrand itself, change its name, erase its past. Members claimed they had abandoned the worst practices. Survivors, however, told a different story. They described a childhood filled with fear, a community controlled by scripture that demanded absolute surrender, a system that turned faith into a weapon and innocence into collateral. One survivor compared the commune's atmosphere to living inside a dream you could never wake up from, a dream someone else was writing for you. Another said, "I didn't realize the world wasn't like that until I was almost 20. And even after escaping the physical walls of the cult, many discovered the mental walls were far harder to break. Decades later, the Children of God still exists in fragments and renamings, though many claim it's no longer what it once was. But ask any former member, and they'll tell you the past doesn't just disappear, not when it raised you, not when it shaped your identity, not when it rewired your understanding of love, trust, and faith. Many survivors still struggle with anxiety, trauma, nightmares, and a lingering sense of never truly belonging. Some spend years unlearning the things they were taught. Others never fully escape the darkness of their upbringing. Because when a cult like this sinks its roots into a child, those roots grow deep, and some shadows follow you even into adulthood. The Children of God began as a promise of paradise, but for thousands, it became a prison made of scripture, devotion, and fear. And its scars haven't faded. They've simply quieted, but they're still there.
If the Children of God showed us how faith can be twisted into chains, then this next story reveals something even more unsettling: how belief itself can dissolve reality, guiding ordinary people toward an ending that still chills the world today. Because now we shift from spiritual exploitation to extraterrestrial deliverance, and to a promise so strange, so absolute, that 39 people followed it into death. This is the story of Heaven's Gate. To understand how it happened, you need to understand the time. The 1990s were a strange era: the early internet, growing fascination with aliens, and a rising interest in New Age spirituality. People felt like the world was on the brink of something, though no one really knew what. And into that uncertainty stepped two figures: Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles. They called themselves Doe and T, souls who claimed to have arrived on Earth from a higher evolutionary level. Their followers believed these two weren't human leaders, they were guides sent to prepare humanity for the ultimate transformation. At first, their message sounded almost harmless. Humans were vessels, Earth was a temporary classroom, and salvation was simply the next evolutionary step. But beneath those poetic ideas was a doctrine waiting to swallow whole identities. A community that cut all ties. By the mid-1990s, Heaven's Gate had settled into a quiet house in Rancho Santa Fe, California, a mansion that looked normal from the outside, but held a different world inside. Members shaved their heads, wore identical clothing, followed strict routines, strict diets, strict rules. Individuality wasn't just discouraged, it was dismantled. No personal property, no contact with family, no sexual identity, no emotional indulgence, no questioning. Every thought was filtered through Doe and T's doctrine, that Earth was about to be recycled, and that only those willing to shed their human attachments would survive. Surprisingly, there was no violence, no screaming leaders, no armed compounds. It was quiet, structured, almost gentle in its control, which made it infinitely more dangerous. Members believed they were preparing for departure, preparing to ascend, preparing to board a spacecraft that would carry them to the next level. And when Bonnie Nettles, T, died in 1985, Applewhite didn't renounce the belief. He escalated it. Her death wasn't a failure, he said. It was proof that the physical body was irrelevant, that the true self would be extracted by extraterrestrial beings. The group listened. They trusted him. And then a decade later, the universe handed Applewhite exactly what he needed. In 1996, astronomers discovered Comet Hale-Bopp, a massive, bright, once-in-a-lifetime comet that captured worldwide attention. To Heaven's Gate, it was more than a comet. It was a signal. Rumors spread online about a mysterious object trailing behind the comet, a spacecraft, some said. Most dismissed it as conspiracy, but Applewhite saw destiny. He announced to his followers, the spacecraft of the next level was coming. It was hiding behind Hale-Bopp, and it would take them home. All they needed to do was shed their human bodies. That announcement wasn't met with fear. It wasn't met with panic. It was met with relief. After decades of waiting, the promise was finally here. In March 1997, the group recorded farewell messages, calm, smiling, speaking about transition, graduation, and freedom from the human condition. Their tone was disturbingly serene, as if they were preparing for a long-awaited voyage rather than the end of their lives. Inside the mansion, they prepared meticulously. Black shirts, matching track pants, new black and white Nike Decades, a purple shroud for each body. They organized their belongings neatly. They ate a final meal together. They joked, they hugged, they spoke of the next level like travelers excited for a trip. And then, over 3 days, they carried out the plan. A mixture of barbiturates, applesauce, pudding, vodka, and plastic bags. One group helped the others. Then they lay down on bunks, couches, and carpeting, shrouds placed gently over their bodies by those who remained. 39 people, all believing, completely and utterly, that this wasn't death. It was departure. When deputies entered the mansion on March 26th, the scene didn't resemble chaos. No signs of struggle, no confusion, just rows of people who had trusted their leader more deeply than they trusted themselves. The banners hanging on the walls read, "The Heaven's Gate Away Team." Red alert, Hale-Bopp brings closure to Heaven's Gate. It looked less like a mass suicide and more like a ritualistic final step of a long, quiet march toward the void. The world was horrified. News stations looped the footage endlessly. Families screamed, mourned, demanded answers. But the members had left their answer behind in their own writings. We are at peace. We are excited. We are leaving this world for a better one. Their conviction was absolute, a chilling reminder of how far belief can bend when untethered from reality. Even now, decades later, Heaven's Gate remains one of the most infamous cult tragedies in modern history. Not because of violence or weapons or conspiracies, but because 39 intelligent, educated, ordinary adults walked willingly into death. They weren't brainwashed overnight. They weren't coerced with threats. They were guided, slowly, meticulously, lovingly, into surrender. And that's what makes Heaven's Gate so terrifying. It wasn't madness. It was meaning, a promise of salvation wrapped in cosmic wonder. People didn't join Heaven's Gate to die. They joined because they were searching for something bigger, certainty, community, purpose. But in their search for the next world, they lost themselves in this one. The comet passed, the world kept spinning, and the spacecraft they waited for never appeared. But the tragedy they left behind remains a warning. When conviction becomes absolute, when a belief system closes every exit, when a leader places themselves above reality, the cost can be total. Even the stars, beautiful and distant as they are, can cast shadows.
When we think of cults, we often imagine distant decades, flower child communes, apocalyptic prophets, strange rural compounds hidden from the world. But our final story is a reminder, a terrifying one, that these groups don't live only in the past. Sometimes they thrive in broad daylight. Sometimes they evolve. Sometimes they wear suits instead of robes, hold seminars instead of sermons,
and hide their chains behind the language of success. This is the story of NXIVM, a labyrinth of influence built in modern times, one that pulled in actors, entrepreneurs, wealthy elites, and brilliant professionals, and quietly dismantled them from the inside out. In the early 2000s, NXIVM branded itself as an executive success program, a high-end self-improvement movement promising to unlock human potential. Its founder, Keith Raniere, a soft-spoken man who called himself Vanguard, wasn't selling religion or cosmic salvation. He was selling transformation. People were invited to lavish seminars. They wore colored sashes representing rank. They spoke of personal growth, empowerment, and changing the world. It all sounded legitimate, harmless even. Something between therapy, corporate training, and motivational speaking. That's how intelligent, successful people got in. Small business owners, engineers, doctors, and even well-known Hollywood actresses. These weren't lost souls or naive wanderers. They were people with careers, ambitions, and influence. But NXIVM didn't want followers. It wanted the kind of recruits whose credibility made the group look reputable. And beneath its polished surface, something darker waited. NXIVM's early courses weren't openly sinister. In fact, many members described the first lessons as helpful. The true manipulation lay hidden in the structure. Members were encouraged to share intimate fears. The community praised vulnerability. Failures were reframed as personal limitations that only Vanguard could resolve. Slowly, participants began questioning their instincts, trusting the system more than themselves. If someone felt uncomfortable, that was resistance to growth. If someone doubted Raniere, that was a limiting belief. If someone wanted to leave, they were told it was their fear controlling them. The more emotionally invested members became, the harder it was to walk away. Then came the second layer, the collateral trap. NXIVM leaders began inviting certain women into a secret inner circle called DOS. They were told it was a sisterhood, a place of support, accountability, and empowerment. But entry required something else. Collateral. Nude photographs, damaging personal stories, signed confessions of crimes never committed, financial secrets, emails trashing family members. Women were told this collateral ensured loyalty, that it was symbolic, that it would never be used. But once given, it became the leash. If they displeased their master, collateral could be released. If they questioned the group, collateral could be used to silence them. This wasn't empowerment. It was blackmail disguised as trust. And at the center of it all was Keith Raniere. Members of DOS were told that their master was a woman, someone they respected, someone they admired. And she was, on paper. But behind closed doors, the real master was Raniere. He demanded total obedience, controlled who members dated, dictated their diets, their sleep schedules, their communication, ordered them to be available to him at all hours. Everything he did was framed as for their growth. Everything he demanded was dressed as self-liberation. This wasn't a community. It was a web, subtle, intricate, and deliberately designed to tighten as members tried to escape. And then came the most horrifying layer of all. When women in DOS reached the inner ranks, they were told there was a final step, a symbolic act of devotion, a brand. Not a tattoo, not a mark they agreed to after full understanding. A cauterizing brand seared onto their skin with a surgical instrument. They were told it was a symbol of unity, a sisterhood, a badge of honor. But when the brand was examined, it wasn't a symbol at all. It was Keith Raniere's initials, burned into flesh, without anesthesia, without consent, without the victims knowing what the symbol meant until it was too late.
Some screamed, some fainted. All were told to remain still, to remember this moment as a sacrifice of ego. It was a level of psychological control so deep, so insidious, that even those who participated didn't fully understand what had been done to them until long afterward. NXIVM's downfall didn't happen with one whistleblower. It happened through a chain reaction of bravery. Members who escaped began speaking out. Journalists dug deeper. The FBI took notice, and suddenly, the entire polished facade cracked wide open. What the public had seen as harmless self-help was revealed to be a pyramid of psychological abuse, a system of coercive control, a network of blackmail, manipulation, and sexual enslavement. Ranieri's arrest in 2018 finally shattered the illusion. The trial exposed everything: the branding, the collateral, the manipulation that had been disguised as enlightenment. And the world was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. Even the smartest, strongest people can be trapped if the cage is built slowly enough, carefully enough, and decorated with the language of empowerment. For many survivors, escaping NXIVM wasn't the end. Years of psychological conditioning don't vanish overnight. The guilt lingers, the confusion, the feeling of betrayal, by the group, by the leader, and sometimes even by themselves. Some struggle with nightmares, some with shame, some with the difficult task of rebuilding identities that had been systematically stripped away. But there's one thing they all share: the knowledge that anyone can fall into a labyrinth if the path in looks like hope and the exit is hidden behind fear. NXIVM didn't look like a cult. It looked like progress. It looked like community. It looked like success. And that's what made it so dangerous.